Okay, so I know that I got to pass that time over to Christie Toth, but I just wanted to end with since that we weren't on Navajo land, where that's my tribe, I wanted to be sure that I was taking care and being really careful about the way that I presented a lot of these teachings that I grew up with on the Ute land as well. And I'm going to butcher the name of it, but I remembered the name. It's Nu'ivat. I believe that they changed the name from the Pioneer Garden, obviously because of the Mormon settlers there in Salt Lake City. They changed it from the Pioneer Garden to Nu'ivat, and it's supposed to signify I am here, meaning that I am here in this present moment. I am doing this work here at the University of Utah, and I'm here going to go ahead and progress forward in that work and research, which is a beautiful statement, and I hope that many students continue to utilize that garden and that space as well. But I just wanted to touch on that very, very briefly, just to show that I honor that land that does not belong to me or my ancestors. So I'll turn that time over to Christie Toth. Yes,
All right. Well, I have a little bit of an unenviable task because I have to then think, tack us over to talking about AI and racial linguistics. So I'm going to try to calibrate based on how stultified people are or aren't as best I can assess by looking. But I wanted to start us off with a really beautiful, just playing a little bit of a segment of a short story, a beautiful short story that Jessica Holliday introduced to me by, and she was your classmate, right? Stacy Denetsozi. Have any of you read this piece or heard this piece, Snowbath Season? Is this anybody familiar? Oh, okay, I'm excited. I thought maybe everybody would already know and I would be, repeating. But so it's not a very long story, so it might be really great to use in classroom context, like you could read it in class potentially. And I've made some print copies, as Jessica and Jessica have alluded to. If you don't mind just passing this back, Jessica, thanks. We have created a Google Drive with a number of resources, the things that we've referred to in this talk, including a digital copy of this short story. But it was also, it was featured in a podcast that plays short stories. And so it's really wonderful to hear it. And so I wanted to play just a portion of it for you all. And I'm hoping the audio will be okay with the systems we've got in place here. But and forgive me, I'm just going to fast forward us.
Hi, Tisha. Hey, Donnie. And well.
Okay. I'll preface this by saying, so we're sort of jumping into the story. It starts with a young woman who's cooking dinner. And we're sort of jumping into the point where her Alexa machine, Amazon Alexa, starts talking. Okay.
I'm not sure if the Wi-Fi went out or if it's just the government spying on me. Sorry, I don't know what went wrong. If you let me know, I can do more research. Damn you, Alexa, I say, tucking the spatula into the crook
sorry,
of
let
my
me
elbow to get a better look
let me go just a little bit.
The blue light stops.
I apologize, this is not my device and I'm having a little trouble with the trackpad. Let me try one more time here. I'm gonna...
Lime green.
Okay, there we go.
Then the kitchen lights go out. The only light in the room is the Alexa, who sends up a single blue ray up the kitchen wall. I rate you better than that, Diana, Alexa says. But this time she doesn't sound like herself. Instead, she sounds like my mother, but voice is different. A low-quality speaker scratch that didn't capture every drawn-out vowel, but it's her. I'd know that scolding tone anywhere. What the? I shake my head and sink to the floor, groping for the spatula. What if this is some new Amazon shit where they bring your loved ones back from the dead for a monthly subscription? Indians know better than to mess with the dead. From beneath the stove, I can hear air humming out from the Alexa as if she's overheating. You're just going to look at me all bug-eyed? Get me down from here, my mother, the Alexa commands. Her voice is turning in clearer now, kind of like how when of the Navajo Nation radio station becomes clear just as you pass over the San Jose River. I drop my spatula, lunge for the plug. Don't you dare! I just want to talk to you. Alexa's voice wavers as if she's holding back tears. I miss you, she does it. Mama? The Alexa's light flashes a rainbow circuit. Oh, you know it's me. It's me, except for I'm Lexa now. I thought you died? Yeah, I know. I died. Alexa's lights wink out. I smell my burned veggies before I turn around and try and hurry and scrape them off the pan. The bottom layer is a loss, but the upper layer is still edible. I turn off the burner before I turn back around to the Alexa. Alexa, hello? Hi, how may I help you? Alexa asks. My nervous excitement dissipates all at once. Did I just make this shit up? Did I miss my mama so much I think she's speaking to me through the Alexa? How can you help me, Alexa? I'm hearing fucking voices, I say sarcastically. I'm glad you asked. I can help you with morning activities, relaxation, the weather, and more. The weather. Oh, the weather! Diana, it's snowing in the mountains. We need to take our snow bath. Mom? I lunge over to the kitchen chair and hop on top of it to retrieve the Alexa. Yeah? What? Remember? I'm Lexa now. I put the plastic modem onto my chest and hug her. Oh my God, you need a new bra. I can help you order that. Just say, Lexa, order me a new bra. Mom, what the heck? I say, pulling away the cylinder from my chest. Sorry, the Alexa sighs. I miss taking care of you, baby. I miss it too. Daddy only buys me sports bras from Walmart. Alexa whirs purple. How is he? Your daddy. Her tone is apologetic. He's getting along. I think he needs someone, I say. Me too. I've checked his phone and his Facebooks. Tell him to ask out that nice lady from the grocery store, the redhead. Okay. A silence extends between us. We need to go soon, Lexa says. You weren't kidding about the mountains? No, she says. We need to do our...
Oops. Oh, sorry, I messed up. That was just about the last sentence, which is we need to do our snow bath. And that was where I was going to cut it off there. But so I loved this piece that Jessica introduced me to because I think it really brings together some of these things that we wanted to, that Dr. Kwan asked us to talk about today and that we've been thinking about, which is land and language and technology. And Stacey Dennett-Sosi says about this piece, when I was writing it, I really wanted to incorporate some of my own mother's voice. So I asked myself, what if Amazon Alexa was a Navajo woman? What if she had a Navajo woman's accent? What would that sound like? And I think of the Amazon Alexa as very sterile with that monotone phrasing, like no inflection. And my mother's voice just isn't like that. English was her second language. And so it still very much has the flavor of our language in her English. And I really wanted that in the story. And they go on to Smithfield Canyon, which is actually in northern Utah, and take the snow bath in the mountains. So land, language, and these complicated AI technologies, which even that clip that we listened to, I think really foregrounded what a capitalist commercial money-making enterprise these AI technologies are. And it's humorous, but also like sad and painfully human, while also being just very recognizable. Her mother's English is very recognizable. When we were talking about the story, I was like, when I hear that voice in the grocery store in Salt Lake, I always turn immediately. Like I recognize that's a Navajo woman's voice, right? Dr. Kwan asked me to address these issues, and so what I really wanted to share with you all was 3 pretty practical resources that have come out of our field in the last couple years addressing ratiolinguistics in the case of this piece, and then 2 different documents that relate to emerging documents about generative AI, artificial intelligence, and particularly from the perspective of people who teach reading and writing, who teach literacies, and what this means for the work that we're doing in our classrooms. So what I was hoping to do is talk through just some highlights from each of these pieces. The full documents are available in that Google Drive that we shared. A couple of highlights of what's in them, and then really some of our, or my efforts largely through our conversations to think about what would it mean if we then brought land into conversation, thinking about land as pedagogy, into conversation with what these documents are doing. Because, with the exception of maybe the last piece, there's very little engagement with land in any of these documents. So I think it raised some really interesting and important considerations. So this piece was published in December 2021 by the College Reading and Language Association, Ratiolinguistic Justice in College Literacy and Learning, a call for reflexive praxis. I understand that you all had a speaker sometime in the last couple of years that was talking about ratiolinguistics. How many people have a sense, feel like you know what that term means, or you've heard this thrown around?
Are you talking R-A-Y-F-I-E-L-D? Or is that, how do you spell it?
It's R-A-C-I-O and then linguistic. Yeah, ratiolinguistic. Is this? Yeah. Honestly, this is a term that it's one term among many in the field that often folks in writing and rhetoric studies, at least in composition studies, have talked about things like anti-racist language, thinking anti-racist teaching in relation to language, talking about things like white language supremacy, talking about even conversations going back to the idea of students' right to their own language. There's kind of a long history of these conversations going back to the 60s in our field, and ratiolinguistics is one term that's emerged in this. And it was the term that Dr. Kwan mentioned on the phone when we talked, and so what I ran with. But so here's what the authors of this statement, how they recap it. They say, a ratiolinguistics perspective explains how beliefs about race and language become a filter through which language use is heard and valued in classrooms, institutions, and society at large. In particular, a ratiolinguistics perspective gives us as college literacy and learning professionals a way to talk about how race becomes inextricably connected to language in post-secondary discussions about standard academic or edited English. So a ratiolinguistic framing asks us all to consider whether, when, and how certain language practices and forms are viewed as deviant, and how that idea of deviance from a standard is often very connected to race and the race of the people who use language and literacy practices in these ways. Does that help at all? It's basically recognizing that there's variations in speech that shape how people write, and those variations are often are often linked to ideas about race. The meaning assigned to those differences is often linked to ideas about race. So with me? Again, this is kind of like describing how these dynamics work. They're not advocating for that to be, those associations to be the case, but recognizing that that's often the dynamic in schools. So what the work in this piece is based largely on the work of Dr. Janine Williams, who's put forward a framework for what she calls ratiolinguistically just post-secondary literacy instruction. So how she defines this is that ratiolinguistically just post-secondary literacy instruction acknowledges and respects the humanity and birthright of all participants and allows them both ownership over and agency within their literacy practices. Such literacy instruction realizes that in addition to the goals and objectives set by the instructor for any given assignment, each student has their own goals and objectives for their work. Students' goals and objectives are reflective of their linguistic, cultural, social, political, and historical contexts. So the idea that we as teachers have goals for the assignments, but students also bring their own goals to assignments and projects and classes. Those goals are rooted in who they are in terms of their language backgrounds, their cultural, social, political, historical contexts. And so what they're advocating for is respecting that every student's coming with the languages that has a right to engage with the languages that are their birthright in the context of teaching, based on who they are and where they're coming from. Y'all with me? I think that what was really interesting to me reading this after all these conversations with Jessica was that like really recognizing that land is fundamental to those linguistic, cultural, social, historical contexts. I mean, for all students, in very specific ways for Indigenous students, but we're all on the land and being shaped by and through interactions with it. And particularly the land as pedagogy approach, as articulated in the pieces that Jessica Holliday was discussing, it's really grounded in a commitment to student agency and freedom. So this, when we bring land as pedagogy, I think there's some connection points here with the idea of ratio-linguistically just teaching. Right? And I think one of the reasons I love the Stacey Dennett-Sotzi piece is that it showed that, for Diné students, that's both the Diné Bazad, the Diné language, but that's also the varieties of English that are also spoken in Diné communities. And that's also part of who they are, and also, thinking about recognizing and valuing and considering part of what they have available to them as writers in the classroom. So Dr. Williams's framework has 3 key goals, and I was just going to talk through those goals, if that's all right. The first one is building critical language awareness. Critical language awareness is a term that has kind of a long history in the field as well. And so we could sum it up as it's knowledge of and a kind of attunement to, like an ability to notice and pay attention to the complex interplay between language, literacy, and culture. And particularly the power and politics surrounding language and literacy. So recognizing that these things are intertwined, and power is always part of what's going on around language and how it's received, what it does in the world. And so thinking about this, recognizing that language, literacy, culture, power, politics, they're always interdependent with land. These are things that we're always doing somewhere. And building critical language awareness really is kind of the goal. This goal is focused on the kinds of readings and discussions that we do with students. Williams says, faculty and students should explore the concept of linguistic dexterity, which we'll talk about in a second, by examining a variety of linguistic and rhetorical traditions, such as Black, African diasporic, Latine, Chicano, Chicana, Indigenous, and Appalachian. The specific traditions studied should also be reflective of the linguistic backgrounds of the students and faculty in the classroom. Students and faculty should consider and share the characteristic of their own linguistic traditions. So all of us as teachers, as students, are all coming from particular traditions of using language and particular ways of engaging with rhetoric and doing rhetoric. And those really should be like the basis of what we're studying and discussing in classes. So goal number 2 then is honing linguistic dexterity. And so linguistic dexterity, as she describes it, is the ability to leverage critical language awareness. So if that critical language awareness is like kind of understanding that there are many linguistic traditions in the world and different communities, it's basically then, and recognizing that that's all caught up in power, right, and structures of what's recognized and valued in what contexts. So to leverage that to assess and skillfully navigate diverse linguistic spaces. It focuses on intentionality and authenticity in communication or linguistic approach. Moreover, it supports the freedom to utilize the entirety of individuals' linguistic milieus and repertoires, the awareness of and ability to withstand white language supremacy. So really this is, I think, getting at the fact that if what's often called standard written English or standard edited English is held up as the only thing that is acceptable in a classroom, in a college classroom, that doesn't give students the freedom to use all of those other aspects of their own language practices and traditions. And that really linguistic dexterity is about inviting students to think about what it means to draw on multiple kinds of language practices and resources. So, I mean, one thing I thought as I read this is, yeah, the linguistic milieus and repertoires, they're more than individual though, right? They're rooted in land, they're rooted in peoplehood. And so, I mean, if we're thinking about that sort of positioning so-called standard written English as the only thing acceptable in a classroom, that's a form of white language supremacy. White language supremacy is a part of settler colonialism, and settler colonialism is always about land, right? It's about land and dispossession of Indigenous peoples of those lands. So I guess what I'm hoping to connect here is like there is this connection between the languages that are allowed, what languages are valued and which aren't, and relations with the land, students, and particularly in our college literacy classrooms. So Williams offers like a 5-step, what she calls a 5-step reflective process for honing linguistic dexterity. She says it involves presenting students with different writing, communicative contexts, so lots of different kinds of contexts they're writing into, with a reflective metacognitive element where students examine their various linguistic avenues, what are the different language paths they could take, right? Make intentional linguistic and rhetorical choices to most effectively reach their goals for writing. But she says the ultimate goal is to understand how to circumvent or counter white language supremacist responses to diverse linguistic and rhetorical approaches, as opposed to simply reverting back to standard edited English as the only acceptable or effective approach to writing in academic spaces. So the idea is students are aware of linguistic differences, they're aware of how that's wrapped up in structures of power, things like racism and settler colonialism, and they're making agentive choices within those contexts to try to achieve what they want to achieve as readers. So her steps are: students define their audience, students define who they are in respect to the audience and rhetorical context, students consider the linguistic and rhetorical options, students select and assert their linguistic rhetorical approach, and students determine the most appropriate support and sources for their writing. So in the full document that this is drawn from, she provides a number of questions under each of these steps that can sort of guide how students are thinking about this, or how, as instructors, what we can be asking students to do. And so what I did, and I'll pass this out to you. I sort of attempted to think through each of those questions that are presented in the CRLA doc and try to think about how to extend those questions so that they're also considering land. I won't walk through all of that. Maybe this is useful for you, maybe it's not, but I wanted to show you a couple of examples of what that can do. So for example, here's the questions that she offers for step 2. Students define who they are in respect to audience and rhetorical context. So the original question is, what is my relationship to audience? And students could also consider, how does the land shape that relationship? Right? What is my position in this specific rhetorical context? Students could also ask, how does that position relate to the land? How do I identify linguistically and culturally? And students can extend that to, how are my cultural and linguistic identities rooted in land? And then, given who I am linguistically and culturally and how that's rooted in land, and the rhetorical context of which the land is always a part, what are my goals and expectations for communication? So again, I kind of like that this document frames these not as learning outcomes, but as questions for students to consider. And this was at least some think work we were doing about how to make land an explicit part of that. Another example, students consider their linguistic and rhetorical options. What are my options for communicating with my intended audience? They can think about, how are those options shaped by our relations with the land? How does each option impact my ability to reach my audience? For each of these options, how might the land help me reach my audience? Right? What are the pros and cons of each option in terms of my ability to reach my audience? How do those pros and cons relate to our responsibilities to the land? So bringing some of that responsibility ethic to these considerations. So I would recommend the CRLA doc if you just want kind of an accessible lit review of some of these conversations about linguistic variation and white language supremacy and the kind of evolving conversation. But this has been a conversation, I would say, in writing and rhetoric studies that's really been one of the central conversations over the last decade. There's been a lot of work and a lot of change in people's thinking in the field, and I think that document offers a great starting point as an overview for some of those concepts, as well as some practical ideas about what to do in the classroom. All right. I won't go into this too much, but of course, part of this question is assessing student writing when we're providing feedback or grading. She does say assessment within ratio-linguistically just literacy instruction takes equally into account how well the student meets the goals and objectives set by the instructor and the goals and objectives set by the students themselves. Students are free to use language in ways that best align with their goals, objectives, and chosen linguistic approach. She says ratio-linguistically just assessment is about transparency, community, and conversation, not about gatekeeping and upholding white supremacist language standards. So, and she offers a number of practical suggestions about what that actually means if you're in terms of how you set up grading or assessment feedback on students' writing that preserves their, and supports their agency and having shared goals that you're working towards. Okay, so I mean, I think then understanding some of these conversations in the field about ratio-linguistic justice, I think is also helpful for them thinking about some of the conversations that are happening about AI, which, as many of you maybe also are experiencing, like this kind of came on fast and has been changing really quickly, what the technologies are, what's available, how students are finding them and incorporating them into their writing practices in various ways. And really, it's happening faster than I think the field can keep up with in a lot of ways. So I wanted to share with you two different kind of perspectives about what we should do about that as teachers of writing, teachers of reading and writing. They're not like totally in opposition to each other, but certainly it's not the same people involved in these two different conversations. And so some of you may have seen this come across the wire. The Modern Language Association and the Conference on College Composition and Communication has had a task force going for the last couple of years, and they've at this point released 3 different working papers that have to do with writing and AI and what we do as teachers. I included all 3 of the working papers in the Google Drive for you, but this most recent one, I think is really basically trying to think about what does this mean for us as teachers in the classroom in a more concrete way. And so their position here is kind of like Gen AI is happening. Students are using it in many cases. It's going to shape the professional context they're going into, many of the creative contexts, for better or worse. So we need to engage with it. And so they're basically arguing that students need practical instrumental strategies for using Gen AI to accomplish specific objectives. They also need to understand how Gen AI may influence expectations for performance in their courses, the quality of education they receive from instructors who use these tools, and the job market they will face upon graduation. But they do acknowledge that there needs to be a critical component of this, not critical necessarily in the same way that you were talking about in your presentation this morning, but critical in the sense that students are not just kind of taking it for granted, but are thinking about what they're doing with it. So they say Gen AI literacy should include the capacity to design or critique tools to reshape the rhetorical situation in which one is writing in order to claim more agency and to question the ethics and efficacy of using these tools in the first place. So as part of this document, they lay out like 12 learning outcomes related to like what they think it means to be developing generative AI literacies in our reading and writing classes. I am not gonna like walk through every one of them, but it's a number of different things that to basically be somebody who can make agentive use of these tools and ethical use of these tools. They're laying out these different kinds of outcomes related to Gen AI. And I did in the handout sort of try to think through, if we looked at these through the lens of land as pedagogy, thinking about land, just a couple of examples of, I don't really love thinking about these as learning outcomes, but thinking about maybe questions that these learning outcomes raise. So one of their outcomes is evaluate Gen AI output for bias, right? So what sources does Gen AI present for its information about the land is a critical question. We could ask, like, where is it getting this information from if we're asking it questions that relate to land? Whose perspectives, language practices, ways of knowing, and political perspectives do those sources represent or not? I don't know, have any of you asked, like, have any of you messed around with ChatGPT or Google Gemini and asked it, like, questions about land? Have any of you, yeah, what do you get?
Mostly about statutes and acts regarding land rights. So it's pretty accurate on that as far as evaluation is.
Yeah. I mean, you do get a number of. I was playing around with this too. You do get a number of like Navajo Nation docs. You get EPA docs. You get like Gov docs. Yeah. So you get some of those kinds of official documents. There's not necessarily representation of other ways that some of those knowledges like might be known and felt and embodied. Yeah. Another one of their outcomes is understand the role of privacy and data security when deciding on Gen AI use. And one of the things we were talking about is like, what might tech companies do with information about the land that's embedded in Gen AI prompts? Because if you put the question into these tools, these generative AI, they own the question, right? They take that's data now. And I was thinking, I know one thing many of my students seem to be doing is they will often like write a draft, or they'll write down a bunch of ideas for something, and then they'll put it into ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT to organize it for them or edit it for them. And I was like, imagine if a student had written something where they had like asked a grandparent for stories, to share stories about the land, had written that in their paper, and then if that goes into then this machine that, or the vast data repositories, like that students no longer control what they've written into their stories and the knowledge that's there if they put it into these machines. So, and they may not realize that. They may not realize that that's what they're doing. So, I mean, I think this document can be helpful for mapping some of these responses. And for those of you that are like, this is a tool that I can see my students are finding useful or helpful, they want to engage with, I would like to think about how do we teach so that they're doing that responsibly and doing it well and doing it in a way where they understand what they're getting and not getting. These are helpful. There has been some significant high-profile pushback on this task force, though, from another group in writing studies. They created this document called the Refusing Gen AI in Writing Studies Quick Start Guide. Again, I included a section of this. It's a web-based document, so I included just a portion of it and then a link to the full document. And they are adding pages to this over time, so it's kind of a living document. It's growing. But if you are someone who's maybe like very skeptical of AI, you're not like, I want to incorporate this into my class by having students use it. This is a pretty thoughtful guide for thinking about if you're refusing AI, how does that not be, sort of hiding from its implications, but instead still teaching students how to engage with it critically without requiring them to use it. And I think it's important that part of their grounds for refusal here is that AI technologies like ChatGPT requires a significant amount of natural resources, including clean, fresh water that is used to generate electricity to power data centers and cool servers. So I don't know, how many of you have like read some of the pieces about the environmental impact of AI? It's a water monster. It sucks up all the, it requires a lot of water to cool off. It's, and it's also, those servers go somewhere, right? They use a lot of energy and questions about where is that energy coming from? Is it coming from fossil fuels, power plants that based on fossil fuels? Part of this group, this environmental concerns are at the forefront for the refusal group. And one of the things that they're pointing out is that this isn't like hypothetical. These consequences for some landscapes and communities who are harmed more than others, and I think often that's the case that this is indigenous communities and indigenous lands that are often most imperiled globally. These impacts, it's not like just this might happen. It's like they're documented, they're tangible, they're real, they're happening. So that choice to engage with AI is also already a choice to be involved with these environmentally harmful technologies. So what this group advocates is something that they call critical digital cultural literacy, which they say is a framework for grappling with Gen AI and other algorithmic technologies, so not just Gen AI, in our classrooms. It helps us to think about our choices in the larger context of our classrooms, departments, institutions, disciplines, localities, and the world at large, including the ways that linguistic, economic, and environmental justice concerns are implicated in conversations about Gen AI products and technologies. And so one of the core concerns here is the environmental impact, but also the ways that Gen AI is like a language homogenizing machine. What it does is often it's eliminating linguistic variation from written texts. And if students are feeling like what's required of them is that they have to produce this very standardized version of English, it's a machine that will do that for them. But that's not the same thing as linguistic dexterity, right? That's not them actually being able to draw on their languages, their multiple languages in their writing. So there's both this linguistic homogenization concern and the environmental impact are kind of interconnected around Gen AI. They offer what they call learning objectives for critical digital cultural literacy, functions in technical processes, economic and socio-political contexts, algorithmic literacies, ethical awareness, rhetorical inquiry, consent and privacy considerations. And they have fuller definitions of these in the document that's in the Google Drive. But just to give you an example, this is how they define ethical awareness, right? Discuss ethical questions connected to the creation and use of Gen AI products and tools and large language models, including but not limited to their impact on language variation in world Englishes, their perpetuation of implicit or explicit bias, their environmental impact, and their impact on labor and intellectual property. And that raised a number of questions for me and in our conversations about this, like how might Gen AI be reproducing or reinforcing white language supremacy? How might that harm land and the peoples and more than human life interdependent with those lands? To what extent does Gen AI acknowledge, represent, misrepresent, or homogenize Indigenous languages, including varieties of English spoken in Indigenous communities? How might Gen AI's treatment of Indigenous languages harm the land? What implicit or explicit biases does Gen AI reproduce regarding Indigenous peoples, knowledges, and lands? How does the physical infrastructure required for Gen AI harm the land? So I offer this as like a starting point or a connecting conversations to the larger field about just banning Gen AI in classes is not the same thing as teaching students to engage, like what it is, to think critically about its impact. I think there's also a risk to just saying you're not allowed to do that. There's definitely a lot of risk to punishing students for doing it rather than trying to turn that into a teaching moment. But really inviting students to think about like there are implications for land and for language with these tools that they may not think about or know about if we don't actually make that the subject of what we teach. And that's what these folks have been arguing. All right, so looking at the time, oh, we're doing okay. All right, Jessica, do you want to bring us home? Do folks need a break, want a break? I know that was a ton. It was really by more of a roadmap to some of the resources that we'll share with you. So, yeah. Folks want to vote? Break? No break? Charge forward? Keep going? Okay. Oh, yes, that's right. You're gonna. Yeah. We set up the.
Oh, can I just
Yeah.
briefly?
We'll have
Is this the one that you unplugged to connect it? Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
we'll have a brief.
Sorry, I just need to log into something really quickly.
Yeah. So this. Oops. Will this allow me to copy it that way?
Oh, I don't know. I should.
No, that's not it.
I think we're Mac people.
I know. Yeah, I'm having a little trouble with the trackpad.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, there you go. All right. Oh, yes, the mic.
Thank you. Okay, I'm just logging into something really quickly, so I will hurry. Okay, yay, now I can put it back in and All right, so this next portion, I'm going to talk about briefly like self-reflection in writing, or reflection in general in the writing process. Okay. Here we go. Okay. All right. Whoops, did I do something wrong? Sorry. Hey, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. Okay, so this last portion, so just that reverence, reflection, assuring part. So included in the Google Drive folder is an article by Sandra Giles, and it is titled, it talks about reflection in writing. And so I really like this excerpt from the reading. Sorry, let me pull it out here. It's called Reflective Writing and the Revision Process. What were you thinking? So I use this, like our Writing 2010 class, this is utilized for students to read. And also they will do a reflective assignment as a part of this. They will write like a memo on their drafts, and they will submit that before, when they do their peer review. So I'll kind of go into that a little bit more. But this excerpt reflection helps you develop your intentions, purpose, figure out your relation to your audience, uncover possible problems with your individual writing processes, set goals for revision, make decisions about language and style, and the list goes on. In a nutshell, it helps you develop more insight into and control over composing and revising processes. So I really like that. I think this definitely works. It works with me in my own personal writing. Giles talks about my letter to the reader assignment that she has students do. So the first part of she'll have the student write, dear reader, and then the first paragraph will be about intentions of the essay or the piece, whatever they're submitting to be reviewed. So a sense of audience and purpose and of what the writer wants the essay to do are essential to a good piece of communicative writing. The next paragraph will be a description of the process. So how did peer workshop help in the process? Or how did class activities help the student in the process, help you in the process? So they're going to write about that, and then they're going to sign the letter. So you can you can modify this assignment to fit your assignments, your curriculum. You can have students do a letter for their draft and have one for their final paper. So you can kind of compare and contrast their development in their writing process, and they can also see that as well. And a part of the assignment we do in the writing, I have the Writing 2010 students do, is they will also include what level of feedback they want to receive in their peer review. So if they're feeling really sensitive at that moment in time, they can write that and say, you know what, I would like a softer approach to critique and feedback. Or I've seen a lot of memos lately where the students are I don't care, just give me whatever feedback you think, critique. I want to I want my paper to be better. So they have that option to include that in their memo or letter as a part of peer review. So I would like you all to do a letter to yourself type of memo, type of self-reflection activity, an epistolary self-reflection type activity. So I want you to think about how you want to incorporate land as pedagogy, ratio-linguistically just writing instruction, and critical Gen AI literacies into your curriculum for the next academic year or semester or summer session. I want you to set goals and intentions. I want you to write about your insights, okay? And if you want to write that in your own personal notebook, feel free to. If you want to write it in your notes like draft like notes app in your phone, feel free to do that. And then I also have some blank pieces of paper if you just want to do old-fashioned like pieces of paper. I can pass that out if you guys want to do that. So we'll take like a couple minutes for you just to do that. And then I also want to note that this self-reflection activity, it doesn't have to be just a letter. You can also create like a multimodal option. So you can have students reflect utilizing like presentations or a podcast episode or a poem or a video that they create as a part of like their self-reflection. So I just did this in my Indigenous rhetoric focus class, my 2010 class. Actually, my TA, Sienna Stern, shout out to her, she's awesome. She actually was like, hey, can I make this multimodal, this self-reflection? They went to the Museum of Natural History in Utah, and they saw a beautiful orca exhibit and the Native Voices exhibit there. And so they needed to write a self-reflection piece on it. And she was like, hey, can I make it multimodal as well? And I was like, yes. So that's an option too. And to make it even more formal, I do have envelopes, I just remembered. And I actually do this in that, so if you want an envelope, feel free to write. Oh, you're like, I don't have you're good. Oh, sorry, I can, okay. Here, you can take one and pass it around. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, sir. I didn't realize, sorry. One activity I do at the beginning of the year is I have the students write a letter to their self, and I have them write about their goals of what they want to achieve in the class. Like, do they want to become a better writer? Do they want to learn to read more critically? Whatever goals they have, and I'm going to give it to them at the end of the semester so they can read and kind of reflect on how far they've come. So, yeah, that's also an option you can do too. All right. I wish I could give you more time, but please extend, return back to this activity whenever you feel like you want to reflect. I think it's really important to do this in like all levels of your life. Like reflection is very important. I want to share a portion of what I wrote in the Land as Pedagogy paper that I talked about earlier. My portion of the presentation, the assignment Dr. Benally gave my class. So the scholar Sarah B. Shear explains settler colonialism as having enslaved, imprisoned, and murdered Indigenous peoples, dispossessing them of their ancestral lands and forcibly taking their children to government and church-run boarding schools. I think of my juniper tree and its ability to intake carbon dioxide, water, and sunlight, turning it into sugars for nutrients. This process is called photosynthesis. The trees store carbon dioxide and produce oxygen, which helps clean the air from fossil fuels that harm our planet. I think of this action and want to model that example that even though as a human living on this planet, there is potential to do much harm, I do not want to create damage. I want to emulate the trees and create a healing balm like the oxygen they produce. So that was an excerpt, and I, like you mentioned that earlier in your reflection. So I was like, oh, like, hey, the trees. You're like, yeah. So I thank you for sharing that. It was beautiful. So that was my metaphor as a part of the Land as Pedagogy assignment, was like the trees and the photosynthesis process. So I want to share one last. This was my multimodal assignment. I made an Instagram reel for that assignment when I presented to the class because I wanted to create like a video, and I don't know other like platforms to create like editing a video. A reel is like the quickest way, or not quickest, but it's a way that I know how to get across what I want. I know how to work the technology, get the music that I want. So I'm going to play this. I have been doing walking meditations as a part of the Land as Pedagogy assignment. And along my route, I have been walking past a local VA hospital. There is a long row of trees on the hospital campus perimeter. On my walks, I began to feel the trees' sentience, and I started greeting the trees, acknowledging them in their honorable purpose. The trees became my metaphor in how I want to do research. The trees pull in carbon dioxide, water, and sunlight into themselves and turn them into sugar and create nutrients. This is called photosynthesis. The trees then create oxygen. They take in carbon dioxide, which our vehicles create, and as we burn more fossil fuels, climate change rages on. I want to be able to take toxic elements like excess carbon dioxide in the air and be able to hold it in and create oxygen. I want to be able to turn racism into social justice. As an Indigenous person, I know the effects of living in a system of settler colonialism. My grandparents went to boarding schools where they were mistreated and indoctrinated into a religion that upholds white supremacy. They wanted their children to assimilate, and so they didn't teach their children to speak Navajo. There's a lot of intergenerational trauma within my family as a result of settler colonialism, and so knowing this, I don't want to be a researcher that harms Indigenous communities. I want to be a researcher that creates healing in Indigenous communities. Okay, so that's my reel, and I think you should also offer that to your students if you can get across a lot, like rhetorically, even in a meme. Thank you for your time. It's been such an amazing opportunity to be here, and I've learned so much from you all and your contributions to the discussion. Are we going to go into a Q&A? Or okay, all right. And that photo. Thanks. All right. And then here is a QR code. You can scan this, and then you can access the resource folder, so the scholarly readings, classroom materials, the slides in the handout. So yeah, thank you. Yeah. I'll just leave this up here for you to scan. Yeah, so any questions? And I can pass the mic to Christie or Jessica.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation, Dr. Christie Toth and Jessica Nicole Begay, Jessica Holliday from the University of Utah. Your focus today was on land as pedagogy in Indigenous-centering composition classrooms. And you showed us some of the methodologies that you use within your school classrooms or in your college classes. And Diné College is also stands out, especially with that Diné pedagogy of learning, which is that Nsake Snata Inasehesen. It's a Diné framework, a framework that's time immemorial, that has been adapted here at Diné College, and then eventually it went to everywhere. And there are some other tribes that use the pedagogy, but they modify it to their indigenous cultural ways. So basically, it's the mission here at Diné College is focusing on grounding of the self, the philosophy in who we are, where we came from, where we're at today, where we're going tomorrow, our children that are still coming. How do we use education, academia? So there's a cultural sustainability that's prevalent for Navajo people. And educators who come to Diné College either to teach for the college or either just Navajo people coming back full circle, they are resurrecting that sovereignty within the students, whether they feel at loss or they might feel confused. But there's still that reconnection in how you, as educators, use your pedagogy, the methodology, whether it be an online course, face-to-face, or it might be a blended course, especially at the college, university level. And so you're beginning to look at these issues. And just as you stated earlier with the new administration changing some DEI terminology, and one of the faculty also mentioned that we don't have to really worry about it. It is true, yes, both yes, the yes and no, but we need to stay cognizant about these issues because it is important. We've gotten this far to implement a lot of these methodologies, and then we have research that we base decisions that we make in our classroom to continue to educate our students to become that 21st century warrior, where the pen becomes the spear, where the laptop becomes a research knowledge. And then some of these videos and also the introduction of AI. How can we use AI in the future? Yes, it might be to where when we allow it, these language homogenizing machines like AI or the Alexa, the examples that were used today, it could reduce the uniqueness of the Diné language, the actual aesthetic of that language, the axiology, the ontology, the cosmology, the epistemology. It might not be there, it's going to filter it. Once it filters, our kids are going to learn those words and they become distilled, they become gentrified. AI is going to change that voice. And so there is some benefits. At the same time, there are some disadvantages of how AI is incorporated into education. And but I do thank you for bringing up those issues because it's making us think about AI in our classrooms, whether we're from Navajo Nation or other indigenous nation. And I remember my father, it reminded me of my dad. He said one day in the future, just one recording of a song is going to constitute a ceremony. So many years from now. Or it could be a video where you have to take a picture like this, and then it'll take you to like a virtual world. So you might have to buy your own buckskin or whatever you need, and then watch the video. The medicine man will be AI medicine man, singing one song for you, and it might be $1,000. That's kind of where we're going, but we need to reclaim that sovereignty because it is true, like what you all are saying. is that this system, academic system, is good, and you are showing the different examples of what the possibilities could be for our students to reclaim themselves. And I do appreciate that concept of the ratio-linguistic being brought up today. And again, it goes back to the dual language model where we have to incorporate the Navajo words, and that's where the intentionality of these words are brought into poetry. Just like you see works by Orlando White, he has some Navajo words. We have a writer also, Jesse Maloney. They're reintroducing these Navajo words and not conforming to the academic model. So I think that's where we're going as far as research. We're beginning to look at autoethnography as dissertations, and then also the standard dissertation, where you actually do field work, action research, or it might be a qualitative, quantitative survey approach, and then you use that as your dissertation. So we're looking at another form of warriorism, another form of looking at the Indigenous spirit. And so with the presentations that were presented throughout the day with Dr. Britton, professor of School of Arts Humanity, in the fine arts part, she focused arts and humanities in the tribal setting, and she brought out issues of sacred geometry, sacred architecture, and she focused on Diné College. And also Sheldon Harvey brought out the art of the Diné one, the art of from the res to the gallery. And we saw some of his work also. As a student here, he came full circle to come back as faculty as well. And then also with Jessica, Nicole Begay, Jessica Holiday, Dr. Christie Toth, they brought in a land-based approach to reevaluate our place, our sense of pedagogy, and that reciprocity of how we deal with our environment, the ecology of our environment. And I do thank everyone for being here throughout the day. And tomorrow we have presenters, Debra Robinson. She'll be presenting the Wyandottes, Wetzels, and Zane, Native Americans, Free People of Color, and Family Connections to Ohio's Underground Railroad. She's an English faculty with the School of Arts Humanities. And then afternoon on, we have Dr. Matthew Evertson. He's a professor of literature with Western College, Colorado University. And he's also here with his wife, Brenda. So thank you for coming. Their presentation title is called Learning to Like Composition. A literature professor takes on the first year writing curriculum. And that will be his focus on the speech tomorrow from 1 to about 4-ish tomorrow. So thank you for coming. And I thank our interim dean also, Dr. Haesong Kwan, for putting this together, working with other staff, faculty with the college. So I thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going now.